Now to come to an end for this file here, I will write one other test where I want to show you another way of working with a replacement for this fetch function in certain scenarios. Here I want to make sure that it, so my send data request function, should throw an HTTP error. So an error of this type, of this custom error class type here, in case of non-OK responses. So if we get back a response object where this OK key is not true, and please see that it is true here. So we want to simulate that we got back a response from the backend that tells us that the response is not OK. Maybe it's a 404 response or a 500 response. Either way, it's not OK. We want to simulate this for that test here. Now for this, we of course will need some test data. This has not changed, so I'll copy that. But now I want to check whether my promise rejects. So I'll copy that code from up here, and now check for rejection. And I want to make sure that the value I get when this is rejected is an instance of HTTP error. Hence, I'm importing this HTTP error class from the errors file here. And then we have this to-be instance of helper method here to check whether the value we got after the promise was rejected is an instance of that class. At the moment, this won't work though, because we have no logic in this fetch function that would ever set OK to false. And OK needs to be false for send data request to throw an error based on the HTTP error class. And that's ultimately what I want to check, that if the OK field is false, this error is thrown. That's what I want to check, because that is my own code and that is what I want to check. So therefore now we would need to tweak our own fetch replacement to sometimes have OK set to false. Of course, not always, because all our other tests test that we do have an OK response and they test other parts of our function here. So always setting it to false would also be wrong. Now you could come up with some way of editing this function to set the value of OK conditionally, maybe based on some extra input or anything like this, but that might be tricky to get it to work. So a better way probably is to replace our test function here with a different value temporarily for this test only. And we actually learned how we can do this in the previous course section already. We can use our mock here, our dummy function, our mock function, and on it we can call mock implementation or mock implementation once. And you might recall these methods from the previous course section. Now with those methods, we can set an implementation for our mock function that's used once, so for the next call only, or for all the following calls. Here I only want to have a replacement that's used one time, and I will then copy my function from up here. I'll copy all that code, and you could build this in a bit of a more modular way, but here I'll just copy it and use it here as a replacement, however not with VFN, but just the inner part. So just this function I passed to VFN, I'm copying that and paste this into mock implementation once. Pass it as an argument to mock implementation once. And then for this test, I don't need that logic because that's not what I'm testing here in this test, but I do want to set OK to false. That's the important part. I'll keep the JSON method around because that will be executed either way, so we still need that. But with that, I altered my test fetch replacement one time for this test only, such that OK is set to false. And with that, if I now save everything and we run npm test again, this succeeds. And if I would now change the original code to not throw an error of type HTTP error, but to throw a regular built-in error and set it to error, if I would do this instead, then my test would fail because now I do get an error and the promise is rejected, but the error that is returned when the promise is rejected is of type error and not of type HTTP error. And that's what we expected. We expected it to be of type HTTP error, so our expectation was not met. Hence, I'll go back to the original code to make sure that my test passes again. So that's mock implementation once in action, and that is how you can work with global APIs like the fetch function here.